Welcome to Pleasurology Island. I'm Free Thought Steve. Thanks for stopping by. My topic today, I wrote it down this time so I wouldn't forget it last time. I had trouble remembering radical orgasm expansion. But today I've written it down here. Using Pleasurology to enhance the magic of cannabis and the power of your orgasms. The pleasurological transformation of consciousness. As you might remember from last time, I've been trying to, before I die, which I expect will happen sometime within the next 15 or 20 years, but before that, could happen at any minute. I don't know. And it would seem a shame, since I've dedicated my life to pleasurology, to die without passing on the results of my research. Because I haven't just dedicated my life to enjoying pleasurology and enjoying pleasure. I have done that, of course. And I would have done it even if it hadn't been a research project. But I've always wanted to benefit humanity in some way with my life. And so it's always been my intention to pass on to whoever was interested the knowledge that I've acquired in my research into pleasurology. I haven't just learned how to enjoy my consciousness and my orgasms to the max, but I've also investigated the theoretical, the scientific basis particularly in terms of brain functioning and body functioning, the basis for this extraordinary technique of learning to have super euphoric sexual pleasure. As I mentioned last time, the cosmic oceanic orgasm that I discovered how to have without knowing that I was going to discover that is a peak experience. And the fun thing about it is, it's not like some of those peak experiences where you have to sort of wait for it to happen and hope that it'll happen. And maybe if you're lucky once or twice in your life, it will happen and you'll have some kind of a mystical experience of oceanic unity with the cosmos. And you feel like, yes, this is the kind of state I would like to stay in all the time. But it's very brief, and then it passes and you're back to normal and you just have the memory of it. Well, the cosmic oceanic orgasm is nice because it's a peak experience you can give yourself whenever you want to have it, once you've learned the technique and once you've mastered the skill. And of course, once you've mastered the skill and you want to have a cosmic oceanic orgasm as often as possible, as often as you want to have it, you can give it to yourself. So you can have thousands of cosmic orgasms. So if it takes you a year or 2 years, or as it took me 3 years, to get relaxed enough to learn how to have a cosmic orgasm, it's worth it. It's worth spending that time. I mean, you go to college for 4 years, let's say, and when you get out of that, how much actual pleasure do you get from your college degree? Whereas if you spend 3 years learning to have cosmic oceanic orgasms, full brain orgasms, the biggest orgasms your brain is capable of having because they fill your entire consciousness, and you can have thousands of those, you're actually going to enjoy that a hell of a lot more than, having a bachelor's degree or a master's degree and being able to get some high-powered career and make a bunch of money. Because the British philosopher G.E. Moore had an interesting insight. He said, there's only one thing, or there's one kind of thing in life that has intrinsic value, that has value in and of itself, as opposed to everything else in life, which has value only because it's moving you toward getting the one thing that has intrinsic value. And the only things that have intrinsic value are states of consciousness. Pleasurable states of consciousness have positive value in and of themselves. They are what we want to experience. And everything else, including money and love and family and career and achievement and the approval of others, all of those things that we want to have, fancy car or whatever it might be that you want, or a trip to some exotic location, all of those things have positive value only when they contribute to creating pleasurable states of consciousness, euphoric states of consciousness in our own consciousness. And those are the only things that have positive value in life. And so cosmic oceanic orgasms give us the peak experiences that have positive value in life. Let me give you a little bit of my philosophy of life and philosophy of who it is that we are, because then this will help you understand why the pleasurological transformation of consciousness is worth doing, and why it's the most important thing, I think, that we can do in life. All right. Who are we? Who are we? Who am I? Who are you? We are the field of consciousness, the field of conscious self-awareness that is being generated by our brain at every instant. That field of consciousness, our brain is generating it and refreshing it and regenerating it many, many times per second. And we have a continuous flow of self-awareness, but that field of consciousness that is being produced by our brain, that is who we are. If that field of consciousness is not there, we're not there. If our body is just lying there and our brain is not producing any consciousness, we're not aware that we're lying there. Anything could happen to our body at all and it wouldn't make any difference to us because we don't have any consciousness of it happening. Every sensation that we have, every perception we have of the outside world comes to our sense organs, our eyes, our ears, our skin, the rest of our body, our tongue, our nose. And those sense organs pick up signals from the environment, and they relay those signals by means of nerves into our brain. The back of the eye, the retina, picks up light from outside, patterns of light and color, light and darkness, and transmits them by the optic nerves to a processing center in the back of the brain, which is the visual processing center. And it seems absolutely crazy that we all are looking forward, right? We're looking forward at the world, and this is the front of our brain here. Our eyes are right down there. But the eyes send impulses to the back of the brain, and it's in the back of the brain that we have the visual processing area for our sensations. But it looks like we're looking forward. But these sensations are actually being made in the back of the brain. But what happens then is that they get sent from the back of the brain to the center of the brain, to an area called the thalamus. And this is where consciousness is happening, somewhere in the center of the brain. That's where consciousness is being generated. And the center of the brain can reach out to the surface of the brain, to all parts of the brain. It can reach out to the back of the brain and get the visual image that we're seeing of the world. And it can reach out to areas on the side of the brain where sound perceptions are created in consciousness. and other areas of the brain up on the top of the brain here. This area is where we feel sensations from our body. But all those sensations then get sent back to the center of the brain and assembled into this coherent field of consciousness that we experience. And that is who we are. We are that field of consciousness. We never experience the outside world directly. We only experience sensations that our brain creates in response to what our senses have detected about the outside world. So, I know that's a strange concept if you're not used to it, but it's absolutely true. You and I will never experience anything directly outside of our consciousness. We experience only the sensations that our consciousness, that our brain creates in our consciousness. And there are certain circuits in our brain that turn consciousness on and off at different times. When we fall asleep, our consciousness is turned off. And for a period of time after we have just fallen asleep, for it may be 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes, our consciousness is completely absent. We do not exist for those, let's say for that half an hour. We don't even exist. And then after that period of time, our brain starts turning on the consciousness circuits, but it doesn't turn on the circuits that connect the brain with the outside world. Those sensory circuits are turned off during sleep, but consciousness comes back on, and the part of our brain that creates our imagination and our visual images, this other part of our brain, is activated. It becomes active, and it creates our dream images. So dreaming is a form of consciousness, but we don't have an awareness of the outside world while we're dreaming because the sensory circuits are turned off. But our imagination circuits and our fantasy circuits are turned on. And so we are vividly conscious during our dreams of a completely imaginary world that we're living in. And to us, it feels as real as ordinary life while we're living in it. We don't recognize the fact that it's a dream usually. And all the crazy things that happen don't seem that strange to us. They just, we're going along with the flow of the imagination. So we have waking consciousness and we have dreaming consciousness. And in between the two, we have a period of non-consciousness. And we never remember anything about that period of non-consciousness. In fact, it seems to us like we just fall asleep and start dreaming, and we dream until we wake up. But that's not the case. We are unconscious for a half an hour. Why don't we remember that? Because we can only remember things that we have consciously experienced. And when our brain shuts down our consciousness circuits, and those circuits, the consciousness circuits, start here in the midbrain, and they go out and they wake up the whole rest of the brain. And that gives us consciousness. This is reverberation going back and forth between the midbrain here and the rest of the brain, making us conscious. But when those circuits shut down and they quit stimulating the rest of the brain, consciousness, where does it go? What happens to consciousness? It's just not there. It's like when you turn off a television, what happens to the television picture? It's just not there. What happens to the sounds? They're just not there. They just don't exist for that period of time. And so we can't remember anything that goes on while we're not conscious, because we have no consciousness with which to experience whatever is not going on. The absence of experience cannot be experienced. And so, one of the parts of experience that is very important is time. Time is an aspect of experience. We have to be conscious in order to be aware of the fact that time is passing and that the present moment is different from a moment before. We have to be conscious to be aware that time is going by. But when you're not conscious, when you have the absence of consciousness, you have the absence of time as well. And so that's why it's doubly impossible for us to remember periods of dreamless sleep. Not only are we not experiencing anything, we're not aware of the time passing. So we have no way, so all periods of unconsciousness, the absence of consciousness, all periods of the absence of consciousness are identical. Nothing happens for no length of time at all without consciousness. We have to be conscious to be aware of time and to be aware of any kind of experiences. Now, why is that important? Because that period of dreamless sleep that we go through several times a night, not just once, but several times a night with our complete sleep cycle, from dreamless sleep to dreaming sleep to waking up and then falling asleep again and going through dreamless sleep and going through the whole cycle again. Those periods of dreamless sleep that last no length of time, that we cannot remember anything about because we didn't experience anything during those periods, those are exactly identical to before life and after life. Life is a period of consciousness, interrupted every night by periods of non-consciousness. And before we had a brain, before we grew as an embryo in our mother's womb, and our nervous system began to have enough of a brain to produce a faint kind of consciousness, and then eventually by the time we were born, our brain is developed enough to make us fully conscious at that point. But before we started growing that little nervous system and that brain, we had no consciousness. We did not exist because we are our consciousness. But before our consciousness came into existence, we couldn't experience anything, including the passage of time. And so the universe had been created 13.5 billion years before we were born. 13.5 billion years went by before our consciousness came into existence. How long did that 13.5 billion years feel like to us? It felt like no time at all, because our consciousness had not yet come into being, and we couldn't possibly be aware of the passing of time. So that 13.5 billion years was exactly the same experience as the experience we have during dreamless sleep several times per night. The complete absence of experience in the complete absence of time. Nothing happens for no time at all. That's what happens when we are not present, when our consciousness is not present. Before we were born, our consciousness was not present, but nothing happened for no time at all. Every night when we go through dreamless sleep, during those periods of time, nothing happens for no time at all, as far as we are concerned. So what does that mean logically? When we die, and our brain dies, this brain, which has been producing our field of consciousness for our entire life, on and off, but mostly on, when our brain dies, it no longer produces the field of consciousness that is us. So what does that feel like to us? The fact that our consciousness is gone. It feels like nothing at all for no time at all. So what happens after we are no longer alive is exactly like what happens every night during dreamless sleep and what happened before we were born. Absolutely nothing happens, absolutely nothing is experienced for absolutely no length of time at all. And we don't regret it. Like, do you regret those periods of time when you're in dreamless sleep? While you're in dreamless sleep? No, you don't regret them at all, because you don't know that you're in dreamless sleep. And so it wouldn't matter how long dreamless sleep went on. It would feel like nothing at all. You could go to sleep for 100 years like Rip Van Winkle or something. If it was all dreamless sleep, and when you woke up again, it would feel like you had just barely fallen asleep and you woke up again and no time had passed at all. So death is something that human beings are usually anxious about and worried about. And people have made up all kinds of mythology about what happens to us after death. And all of that mythology is false. All of that mythology is scientifically complete crap. Okay? According to science, the brain produces consciousness. When the brain is not operating in a certain way, consciousness is absolutely not there. When the brain is anesthetized during an operation, when we get general anesthesia, I don't know if you've had operations where that's happened to you, but you're sitting there talking with the anesthetist. And these days they give you a little injection, and you're talking with the anesthetist, and then all of a sudden, you're not talking to the anesthetist anymore. All of a sudden, you're waking up, and the operation is over. The operation may have taken 40 minutes. It may have taken 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. You don't know. Because one moment you're talking to the anesthetist, and the next moment the operation is over. All that time when the general anesthetic chemical was causing your brain to not operate the consciousness producing circuits of your brain. That whole time doesn't exist for us. You remember nothing about it. You experienced nothing during it. And while you were in that state, you didn't regret it because you weren't aware that you were in that state. So that's what death is like. Death, since it's the absence of our consciousness, and since our consciousness is what we are, death is absolutely nothing. Death is something none of us will ever experience. I like to look at this in a more positive way. Being alive and conscious is the only thing that any of us will ever experience. We will never experience not being alive and not being conscious, because that's an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms to think that we could experience anything without consciousness. Consciousness is necessary for experience. And religions are based on the idea that consciousness can exist apart from the brain, that consciousness can float up out of the brain and the body and exist like a little floating ball of consciousness all by itself in the universe somehow, and that things can happen to it. But that's absolutely not the fact. The fact is that it takes an incredibly complex neurological system, a biological, physical system, the brain, to produce consciousness. The single most complicated mechanism that we know of in the entire universe is the human brain. And all the other animals' brains, are right in there along with it as the most complex things that we know of in the universe. And that's the kind of equipment it takes to generate a consciousness. So when that equipment shuts down, consciousness is just not going to be there anymore. And you may not be happy about that fact. people may wish that consciousness went on forever and ever and ever, but I think it's better to be realistic and just say, okay, this is what we've got. We've got a period of consciousness, and we're alive and we're conscious right now, and that condition is going to continue for a while because our organisms, have a lot of built-in mechanisms to prevent them from dying. It's very hard to die. It's not easy to die. So we've got this period of consciousness that's going to go on for a while. And there's only one part of that period of consciousness that we're ever going to experience. And that is the part that's happening right now in this moment. And of course, as time goes by, this moment flows into the next moment, into the next moment, into the next moment. But it's that present moment, that's the only moment that we're actually going to be experiencing. We can't remember past moments and we can't imagine future moments. But the only moment we can actually live in is now, here and now. Now, when we come to the end of our life and we die, let's say we're unconscious, our consciousness doesn't exist, but then billions of years later, in another universe, on another planet, for some reason, there's another little organism that grows and creates consciousness. And for some reason, let's say we are part of that somehow. What I want to emphasize to you is this. If there is another period of consciousness that we ever experience after this one, how long would be the interval of time between those two periods of consciousness? Our human life now, and then we might wake up as some other kind of an organism on some other planet. We wouldn't remember our human life at all. It would be gone completely. And the new life, whatever it was, would start immediately after the previous life ended. Now, I'm not saying this actually does happen, but if we can visualize the fact that if we did have more than one conscious existence, any time at all that we spend between consciousnesses would not exist for us. We would not be experienced. One consciousness would end, another consciousness would begin immediately. Even if the universe had imploded and exploded a bunch of times, and it's like 100 billion years later, and there's another consciousness that begins, that we somehow are part of. That consciousness would, to us, feel like it had just started immediately after the other one, except we wouldn't remember the first one. So it's what I'm trying to say is that death has no duration whatsoever. And it also can't be pleasant or unpleasant because you have to have consciousness in order to experience something as pleasant or unpleasant. But we are conscious. We do have this consciousness. Now, nothing we can do in our lives can change the fact that this consciousness will end at some point. And there's nothing we can, and that we will experience nothing after that. No matter how much we may wish that we would experience something else, it's not going to happen unless, as I say, we somehow find ourselves in another organism, in another consciousness at some point in the future, but that's just pure speculation. Anyway, there's and nothing that we do in this life is going to affect that second consciousness. I think consciousnesses are all completely separate, and there's no point trying to live our lives in a certain way so that we'll have a better reincarnation later, the way some religions believe. That's all useless effort. The only thing that we know really practically makes a difference is what we do while we're alive, while we have this consciousness, and we're living every moment in the here and now moment. And we never get out of the here and now moment. We're always in the here and now moment. So, pleasurology is the art of living in the here and now moment, as pleasurably as possible, learning how to increase the pleasure of the here and now moment as we live it. Because that's the only thing that ultimately has intrinsic value, is being able to live more pleasurably and more enjoyably in the moment that we are now living. In my way of looking at things, we are winning the game of life anytime that we are enjoying the here and now moment that we're living in. If I'm feeling good here and now, it doesn't have to be the best that I've ever felt in my life, but as long as I'm enjoying it, as long as I'm content with the amount of happiness and euphoria that I'm experiencing right at the moment, then I'm winning the game of life. But all the time that I spend being unhappy and discontent, I'm losing the game of life. But of course, at the end of life, everybody gets the same score, 0. We all end up with 0. At the end of life, when we finish our consciousness, then it's back to absolute 0. You can't accumulate scores in life. You can't accumulate goals in life. No matter how many good times we have, the only thing that really counts is how good a time we're having in the here and now moment, the next here and now moment. The past here and now moments are valuable because when we remember the good times we had in the past, that makes us feel better in the here and now moment. But it's the fact that it makes us feel better in the here and now moment that has value to us. That's why the memories have value, but we're not living those experiences still. We're reliving them in our imagination, and that makes our emotional brain feel better. And our emotional brain is key, because it's our emotional brain, and I remember that's the part of the brain in the middle here that I've colored in red all around there. That's the emotional brain, and it determines whether our consciousness is euphoric, or euphoric meaning feeling good, feeling beautiful, feeling happy, feeling positive, or the opposite, dysphoric, feeling distressed, feeling unhappy, discontent, angry, sad, whatever, frightened, anxious. That's what counts in terms of winning or losing the game of life. Is our consciousness euphoric or dysphoric? Is our consciousness filled with a pleasant emotional tone, a pleasant emotional flavor? Is the emotional background music that's playing right now in my consciousness enjoyable background music, pleasurable background music? Or is it unpleasurable, discontent, distressed, and upset, irritated, anxious, worried about what's going to happen, and so forth? So that's our challenge in the game of life, is to keep our consciousness feeling as good as possible, as much of the time as possible. And as I said, the emotional brain is the key to feeling good or not. It's the emotional brain that all the time is sizing up, judging the situation that we're in, and deciding, the emotional brain is deciding what kind of emotional feeling is appropriate to the situation we happen to be in. If we're in a new romance and we're just sitting with a new love and we're making out with them and having a good time, getting to know them better and getting closer and closer and more intimate with them, then our emotional brain is going to size up that situation and say that the emotional feeling it deserves is of wonderful euphoria. One of the most wonderful feelings that we can have in life is the beginning of a romance. But if we're in some situation, that is life-threatening for some reason, our emotional brain is going to immediately say, there's only one kind of emotional feeling that this situation deserves, which is get the hell out of here. Panic, fear, let's get out of here, the fight or flight response. If I can't get away, let me try and destroy whatever it is that's threatening me. So the emotional brain has basically two sides to it, the euphoria side and the dysphoria side, okay? And the emotional brain is going to size up our situation realistically most of the time. And we can't put ourselves in a scary situation and expect our emotional brain not to be frightened. If we have any sense at all, and we find ourselves in a scary situation, our emotional brain is going to take over and make us get out of there, whether we like it or not. But the problem is, and this is where pleasurology comes in, and this is why pleasurology is not as simple as it sounds. I can say, no, all you got to do is relax and be calm and take things the way they come, little by little, and feel good if you possibly can. I can say that, and it sounds real easy, but actually knowing how to do it is a quite different thing, because our emotional brain is not operating the way that it started out when we were born, or the way it was when we were very young children. Our emotional brain has gone through decades of life experience, and there have been a lot of situations that we've been in that have made us anxious, where we've had demands made upon us, perhaps by society, by teachers and by parents and by church leaders and stuff. Demands that we behave in a certain way in order to continue to have the approval of these social authorities. And we've been in situations where we've been nurtured and taken care of. And particularly if we're children, it's very important to have had a lot of nurturing and loving as a child. But maybe we didn't get that. Maybe our supposed caretakers had other things to do, and they didn't have much time to take care of us, and we didn't get much nurturing. And maybe they were not the kind of personalities who gave nurturing easily, and we didn't get a lot of nurturing. And even if we did get nurturing as children, as we get older, we get less and less nurturing, and we become more and more isolated and more lonely. And our emotional need for connection with other human beings is not being met, and we feel isolated, lonely, depressed, and like life is not worth living, because we need that connection with other people in order to feel fully alive. Our emotional brain then learns how to tolerate being alone and how to suppress our feelings of loneliness so that we don't feel so sad all the time. The feeling of sad loneliness is probably the deepest level of repressed emotions that we have. Repressed emotions are emotions that we don't allow ourselves to feel because they're too painful to feel. If I really allowed myself to feel how lonely I am, how isolated I am, and when I look at the human race, now this is not me personally, okay, because I have a wonderful wife, and as long as she's with me, I get my nurturing. We nurture each other, we love each other, and I don't feel as isolated as I would otherwise. But nevertheless, I see all of humanity around me, individuals who are isolated from each other, who are afraid to trust each other and love each other, who have lost the capacity to share nurturing affection because our society teaches people to be tough, to stand on your own, and to not need other people, and to not show any weakness, not show how sad and lonely you are, Swallow it down, suck it up. In other words, don't express your emotions, don't feel what you're actually feeling. So our emotional brain, over the decades as we grow up, toughens up. We learn to use the front part of our emotional brain, or the front part of our brain, right up here, right above the emotional brain. This is actually, it is part of the emotional brain, but what its function is to suppress the feelings in the emotional brain, to short circuit the emotional brain so that we don't feel the sadness that we're feeling, or the fear, or the anger. So this part of the brain has placed inhibition on our emotional brain. It's shut down our emotional brain. And what that means is that we lose the ability to experience pleasure as well as sadness. All of our feelings, instead of having a wide range of feelings, our feelings get narrowed down, and we feel very little. Most of the time we feel just sort of numb. And our emotional brains, I think of them, our emotional brains, as being in gridlock, like a freeway, when all the traffic is stuck and it's kind of frozen in place. And we have learned these emotional inhibitions so much during our lives that now we have lost a lot of the ability to feel good as well as to feel bad. We've defended ourselves against bad feelings, but that has resulted in us shutting down our good feelings to a great extent. And so we're just in a state of emotional blah, an emotional neutral nothing, and that not a calm and good emotional state, but just an inhibited emotional state. And we usually run away from that. It doesn't feel good. So we lose ourselves in escapist activities, any form of escapism, video games, reading, watching the internet, looking at the internet, talking with friends, playing active sports, or anything, any active thing that we do that takes us out of ourselves, allows us to escape the emotional blahdom that we feel most of the time. We're always looking for something, watching a game on TV, and being able to, identify with the players and winning and losing. At least we feel good or bad depending on what's happening there. It's an adventure on TV that we don't know how it's going to turn out, Any of this kind of exciting stuff, going to clubs, doing drugs, all kinds of things, can be used as a way of trying to escape from ourselves. But the magic of the psychedelics is misused if we take the psychedelics, cannabis, LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, if we take these substances with the intention of just going out and having some wild experience that we'll really enjoy because we're high on these drugs. The greatest benefit of the psychedelics, the pleasurological transformation of consciousness, is when the psychedelics can help melt the frozen state of our emotional brain so that we can start to feel feelings again. And that's why drugs, psychedelics, feel good to take usually, is that our emotional brain gets loosened up and we do start to feel euphoria. We do start to feel nurtured, even though there may not be anybody there nurturing us, but we feel just as safe as if we were in our mother's arms, a little baby in our mother's arms. And we feel very, very calm and like we have all of our needs met. The psychedelics can give us an experience where we don't need anything. It feels like everything, all of our needs are met. We have no urges, no cravings for anything. We're completely content. And that allows us to experience whatever's going on around us with full attention to it and with full appreciation for its beauty. And I believe that the psychedelics should always be taken, if possible, in an environment of beauty. in a beautiful place where we can enjoy the surroundings and the beauty, particularly of the natural world. But another important aspect of the psychedelics, and particularly cannabis, is this. Cannabis can help us feel good enough, and relax our emotional brain enough so that we can have pleasantly strong feelings in response to what's going on. And then we can use the psychedelics for what their name really means. The name psychedelic doesn't actually mean consciousness expanding, although that's what it feels like. So that's what everybody assumes the psychedelics means, is consciousness expanding. And they do allow us to be more aware of our consciousness than usual, and therefore it feels like our consciousness is expanded. In fact, our consciousness may expand so much that it feels like the whole world is actually contained within our consciousness, which is in fact the truth, because all we're experiencing is the reproduction of the world inside the field of consciousness that our brain is making. But the psychedelics, what they do, the word psychedelic actually means something that allows us to observe our consciousness better. A psychedelic, psyche means consciousness, and delic means to manifest, to make it so that we can perceive it. We can perceive our field of consciousness as our field of consciousness. And that's one of the magical things about the psychedelics. This is scientific magic. It's not mystical magic. It's not magic that you just have to pray and hope that it'll happen. You know, scientific magic is every time you get high on cannabis, you get high on cannabis. You take the cannabis into your system and the THC molecules land on the cannabis receptor sites in your brain, particularly in your emotional brain, and that changes the quality of consciousness. It changes how your emotional brain is working so that you're able to feel stronger feelings. So what we have to do ultimately to experience more pleasure in our lives in the here and now moment, we have to learn how to loosen up our emotional brain, relax our emotional brain's tensions, and that will relax our entire body, because we're all running around, almost all of us, with anxious, tense, emotional brains. And the emotional tension doesn't stay in our brains. The emotional tension flows out to our body. There's a particular part of the emotional brain, down right about here, down in this area, that controls all kinds of stuff that goes down the spine into the body, that controls all of our internal organs. And it also, there's other parts of the emotional brain that go up to the top of the brain where the muscle control areas are. And the energy that comes out of our emotional brain can make all of our muscles throughout our body tense up without us even realizing it. They don't tense up so much that they produce jerks, usually like that, but they just produce muscle tension in the muscles throughout our body. And that tension is there as long as the emotional brain is putting out anxiety. I call it broadcasting anxiety from the emotional brain into the body. The emotional brain controls the nerve centers for all of our internal organs, our heart, our lungs, our digestive system, and it controls our hormone system. The emotional brain powerfully affects our hormones, our heart rate and blood pressure, our breathing rate, and the muscle tension in our body. And it also, at the same time, gives us a conscious feeling of anxiety. So consciousness is constantly filled with a low level of anxiety, and our body is constantly filled with a low level of tension. And both of those make our consciousness much less pleasurable. So that's why I said, last time particularly, I mentioned that relaxation is the key to pleasurology. Relaxation is the key. We need to learn how to stop broadcasting anxiety into our consciousness and into our body. We need to get our emotional brain to just feel safe and calm, peaceful and serene. These are my relaxation keywords that I urge you to learn and say to yourself anytime you want, say them. Safe and calm, peaceful and serene. Tell your emotional brain, there's no reason for me to be scared right now. I'm in a safe place. I can be calm. I can be peaceful and serene, untroubled emotionally. And if we can learn to calm our emotional brain down like that and remain in a calm and peaceful state, then immediately our consciousness feels like a place that we can enjoy living in. As long as we're calm and not anxious, we can really enjoy our consciousness and enjoy whatever it is we're experiencing. The problem is that we don't even know we're anxious. Most of us don't even realize we're anxious because we never calm down. We operate at a level of constant anxiety that seems completely normal to us. Being stressed out feels completely normal. And it's not until something comes along, like a heavy psychedelic, like LSD or psilocybin or MDMA, that forcibly calms your emotional brain down. It goes right into the calming circuits of your emotional brain, and those chemical molecules will activate the calming circuits and help us calm down. And then we can notice the difference and say, wow, this is really different from the way I normally feel. And I like this state a lot better. I like this calmness a lot better than this anxiety stuff. But now let's say we're not using heavy psychedelics. I haven't had access to any of the heavy psychedelics since the 1980s. It's like close to 40 years now. Doesn't matter. I've been able to get a hold of cannabis. Now cannabis is legal where I live. And I hope it's legal where you live. If not, you should move someplace where it is legal, because it really is wonderful to be able to, go a couple of blocks down the street and get as much cannabis as I want. Bring back these nice gummies. I don't have to wreck my lungs by smoking. I can eat gummies, know exactly how much I want to eat at any given time of the day, pace myself throughout the day, and feel good the entire day long. But here's the thing. Cannabis is not such a heavy psychedelic that it will forcibly put your brain into complete calmness mode. It will relax us. Cannabis has a natural relaxing effect, usually. But if we have these habits of constant tension, the cannabis is working against those habits of tension. If the emotional brain has a normal habit of being tense, cannabis is having to work against the emotional brain. They're wrestling with each other, kind of. How much better it is if the emotional brain and cannabis are working together. If we have learned how to deliberately relax our emotional brain, if we've learned how to relax the muscles of our body so that our body feels relaxed, that's going to make our emotional brain feel more relaxed. If we've learned how to not think anxiety-producing thoughts, if we've learned how to be aware of our thought stream, the stream of thought images going through our consciousness, so that we can be aware anytime that we start to think an anxiety-provoking thought that we don't need to be thinking, Our emotional brain will respond to anxious thinking by generating anxious feelings in our consciousness. Our emotional brain responds to our thoughts. But if we've learned that fact, and if we've learned to be aware of our thoughts as we are thinking them, then we can say to ourselves, wow, that's an anxiety-producing thought, and I don't need to be producing anxiety by thinking about that. I'm going to think about something that makes me feel safe and calm, peaceful and serene. I'm going to listen to some calm music. Music is one of the most powerful mood-influencing stimuli, sensations that we can get. Music, choose your music carefully. Almost all music, popular music now, is music that gets you hyped up and gets you, ramped up, so that you can, instead of relaxing your anxiety away, what you do is you get into your anxiety and you add some more power to it, and you power through your anxiety, and it gets you all revved up, and it doesn't feel so bad. You feel more, like I'm strong, I can get through this, I can power through this. But you're never gonna learn how to relax by listening to that kind of music. That's good music to listen to sometimes, when you've got to power through something, fine. But it's also good to choose and find relaxing music that talks to your emotional brain in such a way that your emotional brain feels, this is cool. I can just be right here, right now, doing what I'm doing as little as possible, and just enjoying being here, like if we've gotten high, being high, and just listening to this nice music. Listening to music when you're high is absolutely wonderful. Choose music that will give your emotional brain a feeling of peacefulness and contentment, and that'll help you calm down. Anyway, the pleasurological transformation of consciousness happens when we use the techniques of pleasurology, which are mostly relaxation techniques that I'll be teaching you. When we use these techniques, physical muscle relaxing techniques, mind clearing techniques, breathing techniques, guided fantasy techniques where we just visualize putting ourselves in a very relaxing and peaceful and calm situation, and that helps our emotional brain calm down as we visualize that particular scene. All of these pleasurological techniques help us relax. They work with cannabis. They help the natural scientific magic that cannabis works with our brain to help our emotional brain calm down naturally. If we help cannabis by doing relaxation techniques, pleasurological relaxation techniques, we can teach our emotional brain gradually to be calm instead of anxious. Instead of having a habit of constant anxiety, we can have a habit of constant calmness. Not that we never get upset about stuff. I'm not talking about being perfect here. I'm talking about just making some improvement in our ability to calm down our emotional brain, which will then make our consciousness feel more euphoric, as well as being the necessary preparation for having cosmic oceanic orgasms, completely expanded orgasms. So here we are. We are consciousnesses always living in the here and now moment. We can never live any other moment than the moment we are experiencing right now. And the only intrinsically valuable thing we can do with our time is to learn to feel as good as possible, as much of the time as possible, to make improvement in how good we feel. And that's the art of pleasurology. It goes with cannabis, it goes with relaxation, and it goes with super euphoric sexual pleasure. And I'll talk more about that next time. Thank you very much for listening. Talk to you again soon.